I'm also troubled by not what Senator McCain says, but what members of the party say. And it is permitted to be said such things as, well, you know that Mr. Obama is a Muslim. Well, the correct answer is he is not a Muslim. He's a Christian. He's always been a Christian. But the really right answer is, what if he is? Is there something wrong with being a Muslim in this country? The answer is no, that's not America. Is there something wrong with some 70-year-old Muslim American kid believing that he or she could be president? Yet I have heard senior members of my own party drop this suggestion. He's a Muslim and he might be associated with terrorists. This is not the way we should be doing it in America.
Wow. That was General Colin Powell back in 2008 as the Republican Party began to embrace the early strains of birtherism and beyond. Joining us now, NBC News political analyst Anand Giridharadas. He's the author of the book entitled The True American, which is a real-life story of the consequences of racial epithets in America, and former GOP counsel for the House Oversight Committee and now a contributor to NBCNews.com's editorial page, Think, Sophia Nelson. She has a new piece in the Washington Post entitled Republican Women Must Save Their Party from Trump. So, Sophia, tell us why, and why is it always the women who have to rise up and say, hey, this is wrong?
Two things, Mika. Good morning, and you guys have been doing a great job. I've been watching you over the last few days. I want to open with a quote from Coretta Scott King. She said, "Women, if the soul of the nation is to be saved, I believe that you must become its soul." That's the first thing I want to say. So I think, Mika, you and I, we've written books about women and the power of women and knowing our value and all that. That's the first thing. I want to encourage women to save this country. The second thing that I want to open with, Mika, is Margaret Chase Smith. Susan Collins holds her seat. Margaret Chase Smith had the Declaration of Conscience. You know what that said? Republicans, listen up. You have the right to criticize. You have the right to hold unpopular beliefs. You have the right to protest, and you have the right to independent thought. That means that the four young congresswomen had the right to say something different than what Trump might believe. They have the right to dissent. They have the right to have different beliefs. We don't throw them out of this country because of that. So I'm going to be quiet now because I went on my rant. But that's where
I like it a lot.
That was fantastic. That was fantastic. You know, Anand, you and I had a discussion after Donald Trump got elected, and it was a fascinating discussion only because you were a part of it. And it was the debate between us on whether the institutions would hold or not. And every time a week goes by where the institutions hold, and I start thinking, okay, you know what, maybe I was right. Then something will happen the next week, and I'll go, maybe Anand was right. We are seeing before us this give and take and this push and pull, and we still don't have that answer yet. I do find a little bit of solace in the fact that after the horrors of the past several days, even Republican members became scared yesterday afternoon when they heard these horrifying chants going up. But it is going to remain a very close call until Donald Trump's out of office.
And I think that's right. And I think part of my pessimism three years ago about our institutions was that our institutions, which are great, allowed slavery to be legal and constitutional, allowed segregation to be legal and constitutional, allowed internment camps to happen, allowed redlining to happen, allowed women not to vote for a very long time before they did vote. And so we have great institutions, but our institutions have produced all kinds of outcomes. So the people who are running the country matter. And what those people try to get out of our institutions matters. And this week, there have been a lot of insane weeks, but this week has had such a profound heaviness. You know, this is something if you're watching rather than listening to this, I'm one of those people who's been told to go back to my country, and I don't, because I'm happy we left Cleveland. But the reality is, the idea
let me tell you something. Hold on. We will not. I know that we're in the age of Trump. We will not let you slander the good people of Cleveland that way.
No, I'm very loyal. My father called me one of the original Cleveland Indians, so I'm very.
They are some of the best people in the world. Let me ask you though, where are we right now? Where do you think we are, Anand, right now?
I'll tell you where we are. The book you showed, The True American, it was about, I keep thinking about, tomorrow is actually the 8-year execution anniversary of a man we should all know named Mark Stroman, who was Donald Trump's go back to your countryism before Donald Trump embraced go back to your countryism. And Mark Stroman was actually, after 9/11, he was kind of a normal guy, a little bit of crime here and there, but after 9/11 becomes possessed of this idea that his mission is to make people go back to their country. And he went on this killing spree. He killed 2 people. A 3rd person survived. And this ideology of go back to your countryism was so toxic, it destroyed him. He goes to death row. And the surviving victim, many years later, actually reaches out. Muslim American, but by then become an American, an immigrant who had found it within himself to appreciate the glory of America, appreciate the fact that he rebuilt his life in America despite being shot in the face, and went back and forgave this guy who called himself the True American. And before Mark Stroman was executed, he actually, unlike Donald Trump, came to an understanding of where his own hate had come from. And what he understood was he was inverting his own pain and fear and anxiety into this go back to your country-ism. So when the President of the United States is saying this, it becomes an ism. And what feels so essential to me this week is for white people in particular to stand up as people have not stood up before and say, you are not doing this in my name. You are not dragging me down into your racist pit with you. Some people have told me and my family to go back to our country. Thousands and thousands of times more Americans have embraced my family over 3 or 4 decades, have taught my parents how to drive and how to make cheesecake when they moved to this country and welcomed us. That too is America. And we can't let this narrow go back to your countryism define the soul of this country.
Well, I still think maybe you should go back to Cleveland, but we'll talk about that later. The Indians are doing pretty well right now, and they've got the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Donnie, listening to Anand, it almost like I feel like we need to make this public service announcement every day, just in case there are idiots out there that think we're snowflakes for not being able to handle the "go back to your country" epitaph, racial epitaph. That is against the law in the United States of America. I want to say again, Donald Trump's own government lists that as an example of racism in the workplace. And if you say that to somebody in the workplace, they can sue you, they can sue your employer, and the federal government will come in and they will actually lead a lawsuit against you and your company. So this is established law. It is an example of bigotry and racism in the workplace. This isn't snowflakeism. This, my friend, is the law.
Yeah, and it's encouraging to hear Adam talking. I've always believed that we are overwhelmingly good, and hopefully we're going to show that in 2020. Susan, I want to ask you a question, and to Joe and Adam's discussion about the institutions holding, and I always say to people the same thing: hey, it's holding, it's holding. The one caveat where I started to get a lot more doubtful was Bill Barr. I mean, that all of a sudden that the Justice Department was in, because what are our institutions? And that's a biggie. And all of a sudden, it's not holding as much. And we've seen examples of that. So to me, on that yin and yang that you guys were talking about, hey, great news, guys. No matter what Trump does, our pillars, our foundations are holding. That one cracking started to put me a little bit more on the dark side.
Well, we're fortunate that there's been a lot of legal decisions against William Barr and the Justice Department of late. And I think as we see what's happening as Congress starts issuing more contempt charges and trying to get people to testify, the courts are more likely to break in the favor of Congress, which is a good thing. I mean,
it's more of the things we don't know that's going on. As we talked earlier.
But there was some reporting. We talked a little bit earlier about did Barr step on the hush money payment.
Exactly.
Now, what's been reported, I think, also by NBC was this was a decision by professional prosecutors, which gave me a lot of heart, saying this is how we're going. So I think that pillar is still there. I'm not completely sure that's crumbled.
It hasn't crumbled, but there's a crack. Yeah.
Maybe, but we'll see. And I kind of switching it over to Sophia. Sophia, I wrote a very similar column back in 2018, in May of 2018, saying GOP needs Republican women to run. And I looked back at it this morning, and I thought, wow, we really missed the mark on that, because what turned out to be is Republican women did try and run, but they got knocked out in the primaries. They were just beaten, and they stepped up. And what do you think it's going to do to take them to run again? Because their party is not, our party is not behind them when it comes to primaries.
You know, I addressed that in my piece as well, as you know, that the fact that this just happened, in North Carolina, was it, where there was a popular female candidate, and the male won. I mean, and this is going to have to change, or the Republicans are going to truly become a very small white male party, and that is the leadership of the party, which I've been lamenting for a very long time. I knew this day would come, Susan, but I never knew that in America I would see a Republican president of the United States take part in what has been the most racist, xenophobic, unbelievable display since Sunday morning, the Lord's Day. I take the Lord's Day seriously. I woke up, read his tweets, was horrified, and it's gotten progressively worse. And this send her back. As I read Margaret Chase Smith's Declaration of Conscience, Margaret Chase Smith being a Republican woman senator who stood up against Joe McCarthy. She wasn't afraid to take on her party on things like Vietnam, etc. And she's a legend. A Republican woman that Joni Ernst and Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski and the Republican female senators and members of the House have failed. They failed this week. They didn't stand with their sisters in solidarity. I don't care if you don't like their politics. I don't like their politics. I'm talking about the 4 young women. But I respect them as human beings. I respect them as members of Congress. And so one of the things, to answer your question, Susan, if Republicans are going to get women to win and to be engaged and to want to run, this is not the way to do it. As you know, in Virginia, in my home state, 2017 and 2018, we got destroyed as a party, and I'm worried about the 2019 elections that are coming up, the state elections. It doesn't look good.
Think about the optics, though. I mean, the House Republican Conference, the House is much worse than the Senate. The House Republican Conference is basically all men. They're going to get down, except for Liz Cheney, but all white men too. Yeah. And I think the optics of having white men in Congress beat up proverbially, obviously, on 4 women of color, no matter what their politics are, it's really difficult. And think about it, if you're a female candidate who wants to run for Congress as a Republican, you're going into a group of people, a group of 200 people, of all men, and with a party apparatus that has been unable or unwilling to support women running for office. And by the way, this is inside baseball, but there's a lot of push and pull right now. Elise Stefanik of New York is trying to get women to run, and the National Republican Congressional Committee has at times supported other candidates, and there's complications there. There's details that we're not going to get into, but there's an internal battle. I'm not saying Republicans don't want women to run, but they've had a really difficult time.
So let's turn to the Democrats, Adrienne Elrod, because obviously there's a whole host of opportunities here for Democrats if they play this right politically. And the debate stage, the next Democratic debate, the 2 debate stages have been chosen. We have Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders on the same stage on night 1. And on night 2, I believe Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are on the same stage. It's getting personal. Talk to us about these lineups and what you're hearing from the party about what they're expecting or hoping for.
Yeah, you know, Mika, I think people, most campaigns are pretty happy about where this lineup is going. I think on the first night, as you mentioned, Elizabeth Warren, excuse me, Bernie Sanders, the 2 of them, I'm looking to see that type of showdown, that type of debate, because they agree so much philosophically about where they want the direction of the party to go, how they feel about health care, how they feel about income inequality, but they have different paths of getting there. So I think that night is really going to be focused on Bernie versus Warren. And of course, Elizabeth Warren has really cut into Bernie Sanders' lead. So that's going to be an interesting debate. I think the second night, of course, you've got Kamala Harris, Joe Biden back at it again. Cory Booker is somebody, though, that I'm looking forward to seeing how he plays his hand in the second debate, because Cory Booker is somebody who has really started to draw a contrast with Joe Biden on a number of things, but also with Kamala Harris, because the two of them are largely going after the same base vote. And does he actually talk about her prosecutorial record from when she was a prosecutor in California? Does he try to draw a contrast with where he stands on some of those issues, criminal justice reform being one of them, versus Kamala Harris's record when it comes to prosecuting? So it's going to be interesting. I think those are going to be the two big things. Mayor Pete, he's also in the first night. I don't see him getting really into the fray of having a real, trying to draw a lot of contrast. I think he's just going to try to rise above and, stay as positive as he can possibly be. So most of all, for the most part, the lineup looks pretty good.
Mika,
yeah.
I was just going to say, it's interesting what Adrienne brought up Cory Booker's name. And, we haven't really brought his name up an awful lot because he's been sitting at 2%. This has been a race, in the national polls. This has been a race among 5 people for the past month or two. I will say, though, you look at some of the numbers, you look at what he's doing on the ground, you look at a couple of polls where he's moving up a bit by bit. We're still 6-7 months away, and I'm not so sure if anybody in that 2% crowd makes a push. I wouldn't be surprised if it were Cory Booker, if we didn't see, again, just like we were talking about Elizabeth Warren, she's doing all the right things, and when her numbers were low, we said we could see things happening there. I would say Cory Booker would be somebody to watch on stage in this debate. Because right now he seems to be doing what I call the blocking and tackling of politics and doing it right.
Adrienne Elrod, Sophia Nelson, and Jake Sherman, thank you all very much. Coming up, after days of protests, President Trump weighs in on the unrest in Puerto Rico and criticizes the island's leadership. We'll go live to San Juan for the very latest. Morning Joe is back in a moment.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.